January 18th, 2025. Well, we're on the verge of getting the Trump inauguration underway here. Just a few days, and so a lot of things are going to be coming up, and a lot of executive orders and so forth. But in this video, as a kind of a prelude, I wanted to kind of discuss something that came up. It still will be relevant. We don't know what exactly Trump is going to do about the Ukraine war, and there seem to be mixed signals coming out of the incoming administration about it in a way. But I'm not going to get into that on this one, but more in the background of the war a little bit, which should, I think, maybe give some idea what we should be doing. Um, so, what's motivating this partly is a video I saw a few days ago on Daniel Davis Deep Dive, where he was reacting to a bunch of comments he got because he's been an ongoing critic of the Ukrainian policy and the Biden policy about Ukraine. And so this has led to a group of people going on there taking almost an excessively pro-Russian stance. And he was responding to that saying, no, Russia had a lot of things they could have done rather than launching the invasion. And so, so I want to kind of get into a little background here and discuss this. So first of all, the claim that there was no provocation of the Russians that led to this is clearly false. There had been an ongoing, first of all, there had been an election in 2014, which had been which was responded in a real insurrection, not what happened on our January 6th, 2020, and it eventually led to the overthrow of the elected government. We can always debate how fair the election was, but probably as fair as any of the elections over there are. And the result was that a new government came into power, and this was led by a bunch of Ukrainian nationalists who, I think, in many ways philosophically descend from Ukrainians who actually did support the Germans against the Soviet government. Now, after all, if you have a choice between Hitler and Stalin, depending on your ethnicity and a variety of things, it kind of depends on exactly religion, whatever, which way you would go. If you're Jewish, you're probably going to go with Stalin, if just because Hitler wants to kill you, and if you're not, you might go with Hitler against the oppression of Stalin, who'd perpetrate an actual genocide in Ukraine. So there's a historic background that's real. And at any rate, however, the Russians, ethnics in the country, felt very worried about this Ukrainian nationalist revolution, and they started fighting back. And the Russian government felt they might lose their military bases in Crimea, so they decided that, well, out of the chaos that was there, they would just go ahead and take Crimea, which they did. And they pretty much got by with that. A few sanctions on them and so forth, but it stabilized. And they had an election. Again, you can base yourself, was it fair or not? I don't think it was at gunpoint. I suspect the residents of Crimea did vote to go with Russia, actually. And of course, the West always denies that it was real, but I think it probably was. And the areas in the Donbass and the Luhansk Oblast, as they're called over there, I guess that's like is that a county or is that a state or is it a province? Whatever you want to call it. Anyway, that's their term. It's a region. And they were Russian ethnics, and they seceded and formed their own little governments. And they were then aided by the Russians, who sent military equipment to them. The famous Wagner group was kind of created to support their interests. And they basically held out against the Ukrainian attacks at the time. Of the central government trying to restore control. And so as a result, there was a variety of negotiations, it's called Minsk process, which was supposed to give regional autonomy to these regions, but otherwise, so that the SBU wouldn't come in there doing all their little crackdowns. And which is the Ukrainian secret police, or what you want to call it, intelligence service. And they would stay within the Ukrainian realm, not go to Russia, but they would have a semi-autonomous status for their own regional governments. And basically that lasted for a while, but basically was a farce. In the sense that the Ukrainian government never accepted that. And so when we get to the situation under Biden in the 2021 period, as the withdrawal from Afghanistan occurred, which probably gave maybe an over sense of weakness on the part of the U.S. Maybe, I don't know, and it was taken that way, and then the Russians. Were trying to push for some kind of a settlement because they were seeing an increasing tendency of NATO exercises occurring in Ukraine, Western weapons flowing into Ukraine, and they were beginning to think that the Ukrainian government was going to launch an offensive and retake the Donbass and Luhansk oblasts. So what again, that's sort of, I think, the Russian perspective on it. Whether it was true or not, I don't know. There were military clashes going on for a long time there. Artillery shelling of those regions. The capital, the Donbass Oblast, was under artillery fire quite a bit. So there was a lot of action there. So at any rate, it kind of developed in that way, and so. Who knows what would happen? At any rate, the Russians proposed a negotiation to settle a thing and had some demands, which basically I think were completely blown off by the Biden administration. And so, that's one of the points that Trump has made in his campaign about that he could have prevented this from happening. Is that because he's so tough, or is that because he would actually make a deal? We don't know. But at any rate, eventually the Russians decided to invade. Now, here's where I think I kind of agree that the people who was criticizing Daniel Davis were a bit wrong. I'm kind of in between the two in a way. The thing I would say is that I think that Russia apparently misperceived the situation. I don't believe that Russia's efforts are as let's say as innocent as some of the Russian apologists say, and not quite as guilty as Western opinion is. So I kind of explain this a little bit. But if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications, or you can follow me on Rumble with the address below. Okay, so yeah, so so what I'm saying is the Russians, when they saw they were going to have to act, apparently come up with the idea that they literally could bring down the nationalist government in a massive invasion approach, similar to the way they'd say occupied Poland and during the rebellion there, or Hungary, or Czechoslovakia during the Cold War period. The problem for them was the Ukrainians were a lot more prepared and willing to resist and fight than any of those other countries really were, and also the Russian military just wasn't big enough for the task. I agree with Davis on that completely, and so they apparently went for the idea that they could just go in there and I think topple the government. The idea that they really wanted to permanently occupy Ukraine and actually absorb it into Russia proper as another part of Russia. I don't think that was quite the plan. I think the plan was it would still retain an autonomy, but they would be able to install, let's say, the guy that was overthrown in the previous coup in 2014 as the new president, and that with some Russian troops around, they could basically bring it back into the fold. I don't, and obviously this was a complete miscalculation. And also the Western reaction was far more severe than anything I think that they anticipated. As a result, the current Ukraine war therefore evolved from that situation. We don't need to go through everything that happened over the years that have passed. I think 3 years of conflict. But effectively, that led to Russia eventually mobilizing an army that was big enough to try to deal with the situation. But by that time, massive Western aid had followed in to strengthen the Ukrainian military, massive mobilization on both sides, and you have this war. Now, And so that's what Trump's going to have to deal with and figure out what he's going to do about it. Um, but getting at the kind of react to Davis's video, my point is, what could they have done? I think that they probably would have ended up maybe taking some military action. But I think I think what they did by actually making this drive toward Kyiv and try to actually topple the government outright, and plus they were advancing on several other fronts as well, including they were attempting to go for Odessa and perhaps all the way to the border. They failed in that, of course. Ukrainian defense was successful and prevented from getting to Odessa. They did take Kherson, however, fairly easily. And so I think this sort of scared the European nations. Maybe it offended their sensibilities, but it also scared them. And that was a big blunder Russia made, in my opinion, by scaring all the otherwise under defense prepared NATO allies, for the most part, into action. They created a problem for themselves that they've not been able to escape from at this point. And therefore, that was the blunder I think was made. In other words, if they just simply faced the possibility that they believed that Ukraine was going to attack the independent separatist regions and overwhelm them, Russia could have operated in a much more modest way. For instance, Biden himself made a statement which got a lot of criticism from the right, but was that, well, that Russia, if Russia just does a little bit, we won't react that much. But if they really try to take the whole country, then we're going to impose the greatest sanctions ever we've done, and things like that. So essentially, what I think they might have been smart to do would have simply put more military aid into the Donbass and Luhansk regions to mobilize their army in right outside of those regions, ready to go. And if in fact a serious Ukrainian attack had occurred, they could have simply, went into those regions to defend them, and not actually went for Kyiv, not went for, so to speak, and therefore probably would not have scared the Europeans as much. You'd have let the Ukrainians actually start the conflict. And therefore, you would be in a better position in the diplomatic world and in the UN. You could have used that as a method, and probably the massive censorship that we've imposed over everything since then might not have come to pass, as an example. So I think that was a blunder that Russia made. I'm just trying to go through there that if in fact, of course, there wasn't a serious attack on the separatist regions, then they wouldn't have had to done anything at all, right? They could have stayed out of it and just left it like it was, so to speak. But I think they were hoping I think to some degree, I think it was more than just trying to force a diplomatic negotiation with NATO and the U.S. and so forth. I think they really were trying to bring Ukraine back they had been for a while, and it really spun out of control. And it's probably also true that certain factors in the West really wanted it to spin out of control because they had their own designs on things and objectives, particularly in the Biden administration, and partly Biden himself and his advisors. I mean, Biden, what kind of mental state was he in? But I think they wanted to reestablish an image of strength after the fiasco in Afghanistan, and so this was their opportunity. So you have that playing into it as well. But the blunder I think that Russia made was attacking with an inadequate force, and they didn't have an adequate force in the way they did, and therefore startling the Europeans into agreeing with us to go full scale in terms of sanctions and opposition and massive aid and so forth. I think was their blunder, and are paying a big price for it. However, Ukraine is paying a big price, probably a bigger price for it at the present time. I mean, the country is being torn to pieces. And of course, the current situation is complicated because the Ukrainians have passed a law which forbids them to negotiate with the Russian government effectively. And that's not too good. And the Russians have annexed areas that they don't even control formally, and as part of Russia, and now they're trying to take the areas that they've annexed, which they haven't got to yet. but presumably this is a minimal demand they're putting out in order to have a termination of the war. The other factor is that neither side trusts the other side, and neither side sees a simple ceasefire as a solution, because both sides fear the other will reinitiate the conflict when they've been able to rearm and reorganize sufficiently. In the case of Ukraine, the idea that Ukraine would bring in a bunch of weapons from the West and reorganize their military, and the Russians, of course, would rebuild their stocks of weapons and be prepared to move also. So so right now each would see a ceasefire as being unstable, and the terms for a comprehensive settlement seem to be a little bit out of reach. So that's kind of the background on the way I see the situation. What I think is false that the West has been claiming is that Russia has a plan to go well beyond Ukraine and actually attack NATO countries. And I think the problem there is, I would agree that if maybe they would like to take the Baltic states back, but they're not going to go to war with NATO to do it, I don't think. And I think any attack of that sort would stimulate a much wider war. And as I point out in previous videos, a concept of horizontal escalation, that you could be in a situation where the U.S. NATO navies could completely blockade the Russians, for example. Although right now, apparently, they're under a semi-blockade of sanctions, as I've heard. I don't know how that's going to play out, this whole idea of forbidding Russia from selling oil to anybody. I don't know whether that will everybody go along with that or face U.S. pushback, or for the moment, I guess that's the situation. So anyway, but it does give you an idea kind of where we are. I think, so I don't think there's any great risk of that. The risk is that if Russia gets pressed to the point where they're damaged too much, attacked too much, that they may escalate themselves to try to get out of the jam. And that gets into the issue of potential even nuclear conflict. I mean, and that's something we hope does not happen. And we don't know how, if nuclear weapons get to be used, we don't know how rapidly things will escalate. It could be in a matter of, an hour or two to full-scale destruction, or it could be a thing where each side takes a shot at each other or something like that. Or it could be I don't know. With Trump in there, you would think that it'd be less likely to be a purely passive reaction to it. On the other hand, just how much of the United States do they want to get blown up in order to blow up most of Russia? So hopefully it won't get to that level. And for the moment, Russia is on the offensive and seems to be winning the war for the most part everywhere, but seems to be in the Kursk region, which is kind of interesting to me. That's a whole other question as to why Russia has been as ineffective in repelling the Kursk invasion. There's two possibilities. One, that the best Ukrainian units are in that region and Russia's having trouble dealing with them. And the other possibility is Russia doesn't really want to push them out, because as long as the best units of Ukraine are in there, they aren't repelling their attacks in the rest eastern regions, and therefore they're actually gaining territory pretty rapidly. But at any rate, that's kind of my rundown on the thing. I think that was the mistake they made. If they decided to take action, was that they were too bold and did something that absolutely startled the West into a major opposition. Whereas more marginal things like they'd done earlier, maybe on a more intensive scale, but still marginal, probably wouldn't have led to anything like what actually happened. So anyway, I'll be wrapping this up for now, and we'll have to see what happens once Trump gets in and how he handles it. I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and my addresses, my social media accounts are in the description below. So all four this time.